When we turn our thoughts toward ancient America, before the rise of bustling cities, before the grand pyramids of the Mayans or the expansive roads of the Incas, we find ourselves standing quietly at the threshold of a land defined by silence, immensity, and timelessness. It is a continent stretching far beyond the horizon, filled with forests that whisper like seas, rivers that pulse like veins through the earth, mountains rising like guardians of the sky, and deserts lying in patient repose under an endless canopy of stars. Long before the memory of civilization, the landscapes themselves were the first histories, etched not in ink or stone, but in winds, waters, and the quiet persistence of time. Imagine the far north, where the icy breath of tundra sweeps across a world almost untouched by warmth. The ground is locked beneath frost, but life persists, silent caribou moving like shadows across the snow, owls gliding soundlessly in pale twilight, and rivers frozen into glassy ribbons. Here the nights are long, the aurora paints shifting, curtains of green and violet across the heavens, and the silence is not empty but filled with the slow heartbeat of the earth itself. It is a silence in which ancient travelers, wrapped in furs, would walk softly, following the traces of herds, their breath rising like small clouds into the frigid air dot. Far to the south, the story is different, but no less profound. The Amazon basin spreads outward, a seemingly endless ocean of trees. Each leaf trembles gently beneath invisible winds, and the canopy forms a sheltering roof that darkens the forest floor. The river, massive and slow, glides endlessly toward the sea, carrying with it the secrets of mountains far beyond. In this place mornings awaken with the calls of unseen birds. Evenings descend with the chorus of insects, and nights are cloaked in mist rising like ghosts from the water. To walk here in ancient times was to be enfolded by nature herself, every tree trunk covered in moss, every stone alive with lichen, every shadow filled with mystery dot. Between these extremes of ice and jungle lie vast plains savannas, where grasses sway endlessly, stretching further than the eye can travel. Buffalo once moved in immense herds, a sea of bodies undulating across the horizon, their hooves beating softly against the earth. The sound was distant thunder, yet when the herds passed, stillness returned, as if the land itself exhaled. Here, under immense skies, ancient people would sit beside fires, watching sparks drift upward toward stars that seemed close enough to touch. The constellations told stories older than memory, and those stories lived not in books or monuments, but in the rhythm of breathing, in the murmur of firewood, and in the endless canopy above. To the west rise the mountains, great jagged ranges where snow lingers even through summer, and thin wings sing in the passes. The Andes, the Sierra Madre, the Rockies, each range a spine of stone pushing upward against the sky. In these highlands lakes gleam like polished mirrors, reflecting clouds that drift lazily overhead. Ancient travelers would climb steadily, step after step, lungs burning with thin air, until they reached a place where the world fell silent and all that remained was the whisper of wind and the slow crunch of footsteps on stone. Mountains were not only barriers but sacred presences, guardians that demanded respect and patience. To sleep beneath them was to rest under the watch of Titans, to feel small and yet profoundly connected to the immensity of the earth dot in the deserts. Silence took on a different character. The sands shifted beneath hot winds, and the rocks, sculpted by centuries, stood like petrified guardians. Cacti reached upward, enduring sun after sun, and the ground itself glowed red and gold. Under dawn and dusk, at night, the desert was transformed. Without clouds or trees, the sky stretched unbroken, and the stars burned brighter than anywhere else. An ancient traveler, lying upon a simple mat of woven reeds, would have gazed upward into infinity, feeling at once the fragility and the vastness of existence. The desert was not empty, it was alive with the slow patience of survival, with lizards moving silently, with owls gliding low, and with a timeless sense that nothing here hurried, that everything was waiting. Across the coasts, waves rose and froze and fell in rhythms that never ended. The Pacific, immense and unyielding, brought salt winds to the western shores, while the Atlantic cradled sands and estuaries to the east. Coastal peoples lived with the sea as both provider and mystery. The tide whispered its eternal song, pulling back, returning, pulling back again. Driftwood collected on shores, gulls called faintly in the distance, and the horizon blurred into haze. Ancient boats, carved from single trunks of trees, would rest silently upon beaches. Their prows pointed toward waters both feared and trusted. Nights along the coast were softened by the lull of waves, and mornings began with the faint glitter of sunlight across endless water dot in this first great chapter of ancient America. What emerges is not yet the history of human conquest or architecture or empire. It is the history of silence, of landscapes that cradled the first people, teaching them patience, humility, and reverence. To fall asleep with these images in mind is to walk slowly across tundra snow, to drift upon wide rivers, to gaze upward, beneath desert stars, to hear mountains breathing, and to feel the land itself as a living, timeless companion. These landscapes were more than settings. They were teachers, ancestors, and companions, holding stories not in words but in wind, stone, and water dot. And so, before we walk further into the footsteps of forgotten civilizations, we pause here, in the vast stillness. We breathe in the frost of northern winds, the damp breath of jungles, the warmth of deserts, the crisp air of mountains, and the salt of coasts. We rest in the quiet knowledge that all civilizations began first with listening, to the land, to the silence, and to the quiet heart of ancient America. Before the pyramids rose in Mesoamerica, before stone temples and grand plazas, before even villages of clay and reed, there were footsteps in the soil, soft, careful, almost erased by time. These were the steps of the paleo-hunters, the first people to walk into the vastness of the Americas. Their arrival was not sudden, not dramatic, but gradual, like the slow spreading of dawn across a dark horizon. They carried with them the simplicity of survival, tools of stone, knowledge of fire, and a patient reliance upon the rhythms of the land. We imagine them crossing the frozen bridge of Beringia, where Siberia once kissed Alaska, a land now lost beneath seas but once solid and wide. They followed herds of mammoth and bison, moving not with haste but with endurance. The winds were harsh, the cold deep, yet there was determination in every step. At night they gathered around fires, the crackle of flames their comfort against the endless winds. The firelight danced upon the faces of children and elders alike, softening hardship into quiet warmth. These were people not defined by conquest, but by movement, always moving, always listening to the land. When they reached new valleys and plains, they learned the silence of waiting. Hunting was not a sudden act, but a slow unfolding. Men and women, crouched in tall grasses, their breath steady, their eyes fixed upon the distant shapes of bison. Hours might pass before a single arrow was released, before a spear was cast. The earth beneath their knees was not simply ground, it was the patient stage of survival. Each footstep upon soil carried weight. Each trail they left behind a story, written in dust, in snow, in mud that would dry and harden before the winds erased it. Mammoths walked these lands then, great and slow, their shadows stretching across plains at dusk. To hunt one was not a single effort, but a communal act of courage and unity. Spears tipped with sharpened stone glistened in the cold light, held by hands calloused with practice. Sometimes the hunt succeeded, sometimes it failed, but always it demanded patience. Around the fallen body of a beast there was reverence as much as relief. Every piece of the animal was used: meat for sustenance, hides for warmth, bones for tools, sinew for bindings. Nothing was wasted. To live was to honor life even in its taking. Children learned through watching. They saw their elders strike flint against stone, sparks leaping into dry grass until smoke and flame were born. They listened to stories told, not with grand words but with gestures, the pointing to stars, the tracing of footprints, the rhythm of hands shaping tools. Theirs was a quiet education, one carried by memory rather than books. Knowledge was passed along in whispers at dusk, in murmurs while tending fires, in the slow unfolding of journeys across landscapes vast and unknown. At riversides, the paleo hunters knelt to drink, cupping cold water in their hands. They watched fish darting beneath the surface, shadows slipping between stones. Sometimes nets of woven fibers caught these darting lives. Sometimes sharp-tipped spears flashed downward into currents. The river was not only a source of water, but a guide. To follow its bends was to follow the path carved by time itself. Along its banks camps rose briefly, fires glowing, skins stretched for drying, laughter quiet but present. And always in time the people moved on, leaving little behind except faint impressions of feet and ash. Caves offered shelter, and inside their walls flickering light-painted scenes, both real and imagined. Hunters traced animals upon stone, with fingers blackened by charcoal. These figures were not decoration, but memory, a way to honor the animals they depended upon, a way to make sure the spirit of the hunt lived longer than the body. The caves held echoes of voices long since gone, voices that may have sung softly while fires crackled, voices that may have lulled children into sleep with tales of journeys and shadows. Their tools, though simple to us, carried profound meaning. A flint blade, carefully knapped, was a companion as much as an object. It cut meat, scraped hides, carved wood. It represented foresight and skill, hours of shaping stone until the edge was sharp enough to carry hope of survival. Spears, atlals, knives, all were crafted with patience, each one reflecting the hand of its maker, each one part of a shared struggle to endure. As centuries passed, the hunters spread across the land. Some walked southward through valleys that would later cradle civilizations. Others remained in forests or plains, adapting to each new environment with quiet resilience. Their journeys were not marked by monuments or empires, but by the soft impressions of camps, by middens of shells near coasts, by the scattering of tools lost or discarded in earth. These traces are faint now, but they whisper still. They remind us that history begins not with kings or temples, but with footsteps in soil, with firelight and darkness, with the silent patience of survival. And so, as we imagine lying beneath, stars in those distant nights, the fire's glow soft against the vast dark, we hear the breathing of a small band of travelers. We hear the distant cry of wolves, the shifting of herds, the slow pulse of a river nearby. The world was immense, but their spirits endured it with quiet grace. The paleo hunters carried no banners, no crowns, no written words, only footsteps, only fire, only the will to move forward. Their story is the first chapter of America, written softly, patiently, in silence. After countless generations of wandering, of following herds across plains and tracing rivers into unknown valleys, there came a quiet turning in the story of ancient America. The hunters, whose footsteps had once pressed only briefly into soil, before vanishing, began to linger. They found places where the land seemed especially generous, where rivers bent into fertile curves, where wild grains grew in abundance, where roots could be gathered without endless searching. Slowly, gradually, without suddenness or fanfare, the first villages began to appear. It began with shelters. At first they were simple. Hides stretched over wooden frames, reeds bound together against wind and rain. But with time, as people returned again and again to the same familiar places, their homes became steadier. Clay was pressed into walls, stones laid into circles, roofs covered with grasses. A cluster of such shelters formed a pattern, and that pattern was a village. Smoke rose from several fires rather than one. Children's laughter echoed between homes, instead of across empty plains. The air grew warm with familiarity. The people who had once carried only tools and hides now carried something else, memory. Of place, they began to plant seeds, at first cautiously, almost experimentally. A grain dropped into soil, a kernel of maize pressed beneath the earth, a squash seed saved from a meal and buried in damp ground. When green shoots appeared weeks later, there must have been awe, as if the earth itself were giving gifts for the smallest acts of patience. Agriculture was not discovered in a single moment, but unfolded like dawn, slowly brightening until life itself felt changed. In these early villages, days passed with a softer rhythm. The chase of the hunt was still there, but it was joined by quieter labors, watering seedlings, pulling weeds, watching for the first blossoms of maize. Hands once hardened only by stone tools were now also stained with soil. A mother might sing softly as she worked rows of young plants, her child playing nearby with pebbles and reeds. A father might repair fishing nets by the river, the rippling current keeping time with his slow, deliberate motions. Evenings in the villages carried a new kind of stillness. Fires still flickered, but now there were many fires, each hearth a circle of warmth. Food was shared not only from the hunt, but from gardens, from fields that had begun to stretch outward in green. Neighbors exchanged what they had grown, trading beans for maize, squash for roots. Community deepened not only in survival, but in sharing, in the gentle weaving together of lives. The houses themselves told stories. Some were round, with low walls and domed roofs. Others were rectangular, their frames sturdy, their walls strengthened with clay, paths formed between them, worn smooth by footsteps. In the mornings these paths filled with movement, women carrying baskets of food, children chasing one another, elders sitting in the sun. Life was no longer only about moving forward, but about returning, about belonging to a place. The first storage pits appeared, dug carefully into the ground and lined with stone or clay. Into them went surplus grains, dried fish, seeds for the next season. This was more than practicality. It was a vision of the future. The people were no longer bound to the immediate present. They could think ahead, plan for seasons, imagine. Continuity. The earth itself had become both table and promise. Rituals, too, began to take root in the soil of these villages. Seeds were planted not only with hands, but with prayers. Harvests were gathered not only with joy, but with gratitude. Small figures carved from stone, simple but powerful, were placed near fields as guardians. Fires were lit not only for warmth, but for ceremonies that bound the people together in memory and hope. The landscape around the villages changed gently. Forest edges thinned into clearings where fields spread. Trails connected one cluster of homes to another. Rivers became familiar, their crossings marked with stones. Hillsides carried the echo of footsteps climbing to watch the sky for signs of weather. And at night, the stars still shone as they always had, but now they were reflected in the calm waters of irrigation ditches, shimmering softly as if blessing the new rhythm of settled life. Children grew up with a different sense of the world than their wandering ancestors. They knew not only the chase of bison or the tracking of deer, but the tending of maize, the weaving of baskets, the shaping of clay vessels. Their stories began not only with once on the plains, but also with here in this place. They learned that the earth was not only something to move across, but something to care for, to remain with, to cultivate gently. The first villages were not cities. They had no great walls, no temples of stone, no kings. They were small, fragile, tender beginnings of belonging. Yet in their simplicity they carried seeds of all that would follow. The pyramids, the roads, the empires all grew from the patient act of planting a seed in soil, from the quiet decision to stay, to settle, to build. And so when we imagine lying down in such a village as dusk descends, we hear the soft hum of life around us, children's voices fading, fires crackling, crickets singing from the grasses nearby. We feel the warmth of clay walls holding the day's heat, smell the sweetness of maize roasting, see the slow rising of stars above thatched roofs. It is not dramatic history, but tender history, the history of roots rather than conquests, of soil rather than swords. It is the history of beginnings, gentle and enduring, written in seeds and footsteps that no wind will ever erase. When the first villagers began to look upward, their gaze fell upon mountains that seemed to touch the very heavens. The Andes stretched like an eternal spine along the western edge of the continent, rising higher than imagination, snow-capped and solemn. To walk in their shadows was to walk in the presence of giants. These were not merely ridges of stone, not simply barriers of rock and ice. They were sacred guardians, eternal presences that shaped the lives and spirits of the people who dwelled. Nearby, for those who climbed slowly along winding paths, every step was a prayer. The air thinned with each stride, and the lungs ached, but the heart grew quiet. The mountains did not rush anyone. They demanded patience. Clouds clung to their slopes, mist drifted like veils across valleys, and glaciers gleamed with pale light. At dawn the peaks glowed with the first touch of sun, crimson and gold spreading like fire across their crowns. At dusk they darkened into silhouettes vast and still, their presence heavy with timelessness. The people who lived near the Andes learned to see them as living beings. Mountains were fathers and mothers, spirits and ancestors. They carried voices that could be heard. In the rumble of avalanches, in the whisper of snow-mold streams, in the sigh of wind across high passes. To sleep near them was to rest under the gaze of watchful elders, to feel protected yet humbled by immensity. Offerings of maize, coca leaves, or woven cloth were placed upon stones, simple gifts for powers too great to measure, pathways wound. Their way across ridges, sometimes barely wider than a footstep. Llamas padded patiently along these trails, carrying bundles of wood, baskets of food, or woven goods. Their quiet bleating mingled with the sound of bells tied to their necks, creating a rhythm of travel that echoed across cliffs. Families moved together along these paths, children clutching their mothers' skirts, elders leaning on carved sticks, everyone moving slowly but surely. Travel was not only necessity, it was ceremony, each journey an act of trust in the mountain itself. Highland villages clung to terraces carved into steep slopes. Stone walls held back soil, and fields of maize, potatoes, and quinoa spread upward in steps that seemed to climb into the clouds. Farmers worked these terraces with hands steady and deliberate, coaxing life from rocky ground. The mountains, though formidable, also nourished. Melted snow fed rivers, rivers fed fields, and fields fed families. It was a cycle of patience, of reciprocity. The people gave respect. The mountains gave sustenance. Nights in the highlands carried a special stillness. Fires burned low, and the chill crept into every dwelling. Above, the stars blazed with extraordinary clarity. The Milky Way stretched like a river of light, and people told stories of its meaning, of celestial llamas, of great serpents, of ancestral spirits watching from the sky. The heavens and the mountains spoke to one another in silence, and people listened. In their dreams they walked not only across paths of stone, but also across paths of starlight, guided by constellations as old as time. The Andes also carried echoes. A shout cast across a valley would return moments later, softened but clear. Drums beaten during ceremonies reverberated against cliffs, their sound magnified into thunder. Flutes carved from bone or cane produced notes that seemed to blend with the wind itself, music that was less performance than offering. To sing in the mountains was to join a chorus already ongoing, one carried by rivers, breezes, and the whisper of glaciers. Pilgrimages became part of life. People walked not only for trade or hunting, but for reverence. Certain peaks were holy, certain springs blessed. To reach them was to step beyond the everyday and into the realm of the sacred. Offerings were left on stone altars, prayers whispered. Into the thin air, a child might carry a flower, an elder a small bundle of food. The gifts were modest, but the act was immense, a reminder that humans were but small travelers in the immensity of creation. And yet, for all their grandeur, the mountains were not only sublime, they were home. Families lived in stone houses with thatched roofs. their walls warmed by the bodies of animals kept within. Children played in courtyards, chasing each other among clay pots and drying reeds. Women spun wool from alpacas, their fingers working. Deftly, their songs drifting upward into the thin air. Men walked the terraces with tools of wood and stone, their movements steady, their patience endless. Life was hard, but it was also deeply rooted, anchored in soil, in stone, in sky dot when we close our eyes and imagine lying down in a highland village, wrapped in thick woven blankets. We hear the faint whistle of wind outside. We smell the smoke. Of a small fire, the earthy scent of roasted potatoes. We feel the weight of the mountain pressing in, not as burden, but as presence, steady and eternal. Beyond the walls, stars glitter with crystalline brilliance, and the world feels vast yet comforting. Sleep comes slowly, gently, as if guided down the slopes of time itself. The Andes, with their pathways and peaks, were not only geography. They were history's first great teachers in the Americas, shaping the way people walked, lived, prayed, and dreamed. They stood as silent companions, immense and eternal, holding within their ridges the quiet footsteps of civilizations not yet written, but already beginning. In the valley where great lakes once shimmered beneath the sun, where canoes drifted like quiet birds across still waters, there arose a people who carried with them not only the strength of warriors and the vision of builders, but also the rhythm of daily life woven gently into the fabric of markets. Among the Aztecs, the beating heart of community was not only the temple or the palace, but the tianguis, the great marketplaces where the simple needs of life became ceremonies of exchange. Imagine entering such a marketplace at dawn. The air is cool, touched with the faint scent of flowers, with smoke rising from cooking fires in distant homes. As the sun lifts above the eastern hills, its golden light begins to glimmer upon the waters of Lake Texcoco, and in the great city of Tenochtitlan, canoes laden with goods glide toward docks. Traders step ashore, carrying baskets filled with maize, beans, chilies, cacao, cotton, and obsidian. With quiet footsteps, they join the slow procession toward the market square. The market is alive, yet not chaotic. There is sound, but it is the sound of murmurs, of soft negotiation, of laughter that flows gently through the air. Cloths are spread upon the ground, goods neatly displayed, woven mats, bright feathers, polished stones, clay pots painted with patient hands. Women arrange their produce in small pyramids, maize kernels gleaming like gold, tomatoes glowing like embers, squash curving gently in the morning light. Men place obsidian blades upon woven mats, their sharp edges glistening like frozen water. There is an order here, unseen yet steady. Criers walk among the stalls, announcing prices, ensuring fairness. Judges sit nearby, ready to settle disputes with quiet wisdom. Nothing is rushed, for to trade is not merely to barter, it is to participate in the quiet weaving of community. A man offers a bundle of maize in exchange for fish freshly caught from the lake. A woman exchanges cotton cloth for salt brought from distant valleys. Coins of cacao beans pass from one hand to another, each small, dark seed holding both flavor and value. Children follow their parents, wide-eyed, watching the world unfold before them. They see colors they have never seen in such abundance: red chilies, green gourds, turquoise beads. They hear words from distant lands, for traders have come from far-off valleys, from mountains and coasts, bringing languages as diverse as their wares. For a child, the market is a place of wonder, a place where the whole world seems to gather quietly in one square dot. At midday, the sun warms the stones beneath bare feet. The scent of food drifts through the air, tamales steaming in cloth bundles, chocolate frothed into bitter-sweet drink, roasted maize filling the air with its smoky fragrance. Families pause to eat together, sitting upon mats, sharing bites of food while traders continue their exchanges around them. The market is not simply commerce. It is communion. Feather workers display their art, arranging plumes of brilliant quetzal, birds into fans and headdresses that shimmer like fragments of rainbow. Potters set before them vessels both simple and ornate, painted with spirals, animals, and symbols that speak softly of their culture. Stone carvers show small figures of gods and ancestors, objects not only of trade, but of reverence. Musicians wander with flutes, their soft notes rising like whispers above the crowd, blending with the rustle of cloth, the murmur of voices, the distant cry of gulls from the lake. Though the market is filled with life, it is also filled with stillness. There is no noise of coins clattering, no shouts of demand. Transactions unfold with calm gestures, with nods and quiet words. Trust flows like water between neighbors and strangers alike. The Tianjus is not only a place to exchange goods, but to exchange presence, to confirm that life is sustained not by isolation, but by community, by the weaving of countless small acts into a fabric larger than any one person. As evening approaches, shadows lengthen across the square. Traders pack their goods slowly, carefully, as if tucking away not only wares, but the rhythm of the day itself. Canoes are reloaded, their prows turned back toward the waters. Fires flicker in homes as families return, carrying with them baskets filled with food, tools, and fabrics, as well as stories of what they have seen, whom they have spoken with, what distant wonders have touched their lives. The marketplace fades into quiet, but its spirit lingers. It is a reminder that civilizations are not only built with stone and sword, but also with maize kernels exchanged for fish, with smiles across woven mats, with the steady murmur of people gathering peacefully. To dream of such a market is to dream of gentle abundance, of colors and scents mingling softly, of footsteps pressing into earth with patience rather than haste. And so, when we close our eyes tonight, we imagine ourselves sitting on a woven mat in Tenochtitlan, watching the market unfold. We hear soft voices drifting like wind, we see baskets filled with bright foods, we smell tamales steaming nearby. We rest in the knowledge that life, at its most enduring, is not conquest, but community. Not wealth, but the simple, quiet exchange of needs and gifts. Not all of ancient America was made of empires, of vast cities, of pyramids that pierced the heavens. Much of its history flowed quietly through smaller tribes, communities that lived with gentle rhythms, tucked into forests, valleys, and riverbanks. These tribes did not leave behind towering monuments, but they left behind something just as profound, the memory of daily life, of homes woven from simplicity, of existence balanced tenderly between earth and sky. Imagine walking into one of these small villages at dawn. The sun has only just begun to paint the horizon with faint gold. Mist curls upward from the river nearby, clinging to reeds and grasses. The first smoke rises from hearths, thin trails drifting lazily into the pale sky. Homes are modest, built from what the land gives freely. Wooden frames covered with bark or reeds, clay walls strengthened with straw, roofs thatched with grasses. They are round or rectangular, never grand but always filled with warmth. 2. Step inside is to step into a space alive with the scent of earth and fire. Each home carries the heartbeat of a family. The hearth, placed at the center, glows with embers even through the night. Around it, mats are laid, baskets are placed, tools lean against walls. A mother tends the morning fire, stirring a pot where maize simmers into porridge. Children stir, in their sleep, rubbing eyes and stretching as the smell of food fills the air. A father sharpens a stone tool, his movements steady, his mind already on the tasks of the day. The day itself unfolds with quiet purpose. Men walk into the forest with bows and spears, their steps soft upon the ground, listening for the rustle of deer, the flutter of birds. Women bend over gardens, pulling weeds, pressing seeds into soil, humming songs that their mothers once sang. Children help in small ways, carrying water in clay jars from the river, gathering firewood, chasing away birds from fields. Life is not divided into great acts, but into countless small labors, each one necessary. Each one patient dot at midday, the village rests together. Families gather outside their homes, sitting on woven mats, sharing roasted maize, roots, and fruits, gathered from nearby groves. The air fills with quiet conversation, with soft laughter, with the occasional cry of a child. Dogs rest in the shade, their ears twitching at every sound. Birds call from the trees, their songs weaving into the murmur of voices. There is no rush, no urgency, only the steady flow of life. Like a river winding its way to the sea, the homes themselves are more than shelters. They are circles of memory. Whales absorb the laughter of children, the quiet songs sung at night, the whispers of prayers offered before sleep. They are small, yes, but they are sacred in their simplicity. Each one is a world, filled not with riches, but with love, work, and the soft rhythm of living. As the sun lowers, men return from the forest, carrying the day's catch or empty-handed, but still welcomed. Women finish their work in the gardens, carrying baskets of beans and squash. Children run ahead, their voices ringing through the air, announcing the return of fathers, the preparation of food. Fires are kindled, their flames flickering against clay walls, casting shadows that dance slowly as night deepens. Evenings in these small tribes are tender. Around fires, elders tell stories of spirits in the rivers, of animals that once walked the earth, of stars that guide travelers. Children listen with wide eyes, leaning against their mother's arms, lulled by voices that carry the weight of generations. Music may drift from a simple flute or a drum made from stretched hide, its rhythm steady, grounding. The night becomes a circle of warmth and sound, simple yet profound. When sleep finally comes, it comes softly. Families lie upon mats of reeds, wrapped in woven blankets. The fire fades into glowing embers, painting the walls with faint light. Outside, the night is filled with crickets, the distant call of owls, the murmur of the river. Inside, there is stillness, broken only by the breathing of loved ones. The home becomes a cocoon, fragile yet enduring, holding within it the essence of human life, warmth, closeness, and rest. The small tribes of ancient America may not have built monuments of stone, but they built monuments of memory. Their lives, woven into each day's tasks, formed the quiet foundation upon which greater civilizations would later rise. Their homes, simple and modest, were not less important for their lack of grandeur. They were sanctuaries where life unfolded gently, patiently, where history was carried not in walls of stone but in hearts and voices. To dream of these homes is to dream of simplicity, of waking to the scent of smoke and maize, of listening to stories by firelight, of resting beneath roofs that let in the sound of rain. It is to remember that the roots of civilization are not grand temples, but small homes where families lived, worked, and loved together in the quiet embrace of the land. In the wide deserts of ancient America, where the air shimmered with heat by day and cooled into silence by night, small villages took shape like mirages made permanent. These were places where stone met sun, where people learned to carve homes from cliffs, to shape walls from earth itself, and to survive in a land where rain was precious and silence immense. The desert, though harsh, was not barren. It was alive with a quiet patience, and those who dwelled there learned to live in harmony with its slow, enduring rhythms. Imagine a cliff face glowing orange beneath the last rays of the sun. High above the desert floor, small windows open in, the stone carved by human hands centuries ago. Within those walls lie chambers cool against the heat, rooms built of adobe bricks, woven together by sweat, time, and care. These are the cliff dwellings of ancient tribes, homes suspended between earth and sky, guardians of both shelter and story. At dusk, smoke drifts from small openings, curling upward into the still air, blending with the soft scent of sage carried on the wind. The desert villages were not bustling cities, but they carried a quiet strength. Each dwelling was part of a greater whole, walls connected like fingers in prayer. Terraces stretched outward, small gardens coaxed life from dry soil. Beans, squash, maize, grown with water gathered and guarded with reverence. Irrigation ditches traced delicate lines through sand and stone, channels of life carved from patience. Every drop mattered, every trickle guided carefully, for in the desert, water was not simply resource but sacred presence. Daily life here unfolded with steady rhythm. At dawn, before the sun turned the stone walls into radiant heat, women ground maize with stone manos and metatas, the slow scrape filling the air with a sound as ancient as time. The scent of masa rose, mixing with smoke from morning fires. Men walked the terraces, checking irrigation lines, strengthening walls, tending crops. Children fetched water from cisterns, their clay jars cool against their small arms, their laughter echoing off cliffs. Life was not hurried, for nothing in the desert could be rushed. It was a lesson written in sand, endurance over speed, patience over haste. The desert itself was a teacher. Its rocks held the warmth of day and gave it back at night. Its silence was broken only by the cry of hawks circling high above, by the rustle of lizards darting among stones, by the whisper of wind that carried both dust and memory. To live here was to listen to the stillness, to the heartbeat of earth, to the faint trickle of water through hand-carved channels. Every sound was magnified, every silence profound. In the evenings, the village gathered in courtyards shaded by walls of stone. Fires were kindled, and light flickered against cliff. Faces dancing across carvings and petroglyphs etched long ago. Elders spoke in low voices, telling stories of ancestors, of journeys across deserts, of spirits that lived in rocks and rivers. Children leaned close, eyes wide, while stars slowly revealed themselves above the canyon rim. The sky was endless. Here, a canvas of infinite points of light, mirrored faintly in pools of stored water below. Homes inside the cliffs were cool, their walls thick with adobe and stone. Narrow doorways opened into rooms where mats were spread, where pottery vessels held water and grain, where woven baskets hung from beams. Each chamber was modest, yet each carried centuries of presence. To step into such a room was to feel the weight of countless nights, countless meals, countless breaths. These spaces were not only shelters, but sanctuaries holding memory in every wall. Art, too, flourished in the desert, though in quiet forms. Petroglyphs marked canyon walls, spirals, figures, animals, shapes that whispered of meaning beyond words. Painted designs adorned pottery, patterns echoing the flow of water, the arc of stars, the curve of the horizon. These were not decorations, but reminders, soft echoes of the deep connection between people and the land that sustained them. When storms came, rare but fierce, they were greeted with both awe and reverence. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled like drums across canyons, rain fell in torrents that carved sudden rivers into dry channels. Children laughed and danced in the downpour. Elders lifted their faces to the sky, and jars were placed quickly to catch the gift of water. For weeks afterward, the earth held the scent of rain, a fragrance as precious as any treasure dot at night. When fires dimmed and silence returned, families lay upon mats within their stone homes. Outside, the desert cooled, its breath soft and vast. Owls called from cliffs, coyotes sang in distant chorus, and stars burned with piercing brilliance. Sleep came as gently as the desert winds, carrying dreams of ancestors, of rivers flowing beneath stars, of mountains rising beyond horizons. The desert villages may not have commanded armies or raised towering monuments, but they carried within them the quiet miracle of survival. They showed that even in the harshest places life could bloom, homes could be built, and communities could thrive. Their story is not one of conquest, but of patience, not of glory, but of endurance. It is the story of stone warmed by sun, of water guided through sand, of people who found belonging in silence. To dream of these villages is to dream of balance, of red stone glowing at dusk, of fires flickering against canyon walls, of stars shining above cliffs. It is to remember that civilization does not only rise in valleys of plenty, but also in deserts of scarcity, where the simplest acts of living become acts of profound reverence. Among the many gifts of ancient America, few are as quietly enduring as music. Long before words were written in stone, before histories were etched in codices, there were sounds, soft rhythms, breath carried through reeds, strings plucked with care, drums resonating like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Music was not only entertainment, it was prayer, memory, and companionship. In the hush of evening or the silence of dawn, the voices of ancient instruments rose into the air and lingered, weaving their way into the fabric of daily life. Imagine sitting by a fire as night descends. The village grows quiet, shadows lengthen. Across walls and embers glow steadily. Then a flute begins, carved from bone or cane, its notes high and tender, floating into the darkness like birds taking flight. The sound is not hurried, not complex. It is patient, a melody repeating like the breath of sleep. Children listen with wide eyes, their heads resting upon their mother's shoulders. Elders nod slowly, recognizing tunes that have drifted across generations. The flute was one of the earliest companions of humankind in these lands. Its voice was simple, but within its simplicity was depth. Each note carried the sound of wind moving through mountains, of rivers gliding through valleys, of spirits whispering across the night. To play a flute was not to perform, but to commune with nature, with memory, with the unseen presences that surrounded every village. Then came the drum. Hollowed wood, stretched hide, struck gently with hands or sticks. Its rhythm was not only music but heartbeat. It echoed across plazas, reverberated within canyons, joined voices together in common pulse. When people danced, their steps followed its sound. When ceremonies began, the drum set the pace. It was the sound of unity, of gathering, of grounding the spirit in earth's steady rhythm. Even when played softly, its presence filled space, a reminder that life itself moved in cycles, in beats, in pulses. Rattles added another voice, filled with seeds or pebbles that clicked and rustled as hands shook them gently. They imitated the sound of rain falling upon leaves, of insects humming in the grasses, of fire crackling in the hearth. They were often used in rituals, their steady shake like the echo of nature's constant whispers. Children made simple rattles to play with, but adults used them with reverence, blending their sounds with prayers offered to sky and earth. In some places, stringed instruments appeared, small harps, shell trumpets, even instruments resembling zithers, their voices bright and resonant. Shell trumpets in particular carried a power unlike any other. When blown, their sound rose deep and haunting, echoing across valleys like the call of distant gods. Such instruments were not everyday companions, but sacred voices, called upon for ceremonies, for battles, for the marking of time. Their sound could stir both awe and stillness, like thunder rolling across mountains. Yet music was never only instruments. It was also voice. Singing carried words, but it carried more than words. It carried memory. Lullabies soothed children into dreams. Songs of planting welcomed seeds into soil. Chants of harvest offered gratitude to the earth. Stories were sung as much as told, woven into melodies that allowed memory to stretch across generations. 2. Sing was to hold the past, to guide the present, to prepare the future. Communal gatherings often ended with song. A circle of people around a fire, the stars overhead, the earth cool beneath their feet. Voices rose together, some strong, some wavering, all blending into harmony. The melody might be simple, repeated over and over until it became less song. Then trance, carrying minds and hearts into places of quiet connection. Music was not performed for audiences. It was shared, woven into life itself. The materials of these instruments tell stories of connection to the land. Flutes carved from eagle bones carried the presence of birds into song. Drums stretched with deer hide carried the spirit of animals into rhythm. Shelled trumpets carried the voice of the sea into valleys far inland. Every sound was tied to earth, to water, to wind, to life. To play was to weave together human breath and natural presence, to remind all who listened that they belonged to a larger world. When we imagine lying down in an ancient village at night, it is often the music that lingers, a flute calling softly into the darkness, a drum pulsing like a quiet heartbeat, rattles rustling like wind through reeds, voices blending into song, carrying stories that drift upward into stars. The music fades slowly, gently, until all that remains is silence, but a silence now filled with memory, with echoes that linger even after the last note has gone. Music in ancient America was never about spectacle. It was about connection, between people, between generations, between humanity and the vastness of earth and sky. Its echoes remain even now, faint but present, carried in the wind, in the rustle of leaves, in the soft beating of our own hearts as we drift into dreams. Civilizations do not rise from stone alone. They grow from the soil, from the quiet labor of hands pressing seeds into earth, from the patient waiting as sprouts reach toward the sun. In ancient America, no companions were more faithful, more enduring, or more generous than the trinity of maize, beans, and squash. Together they formed the foundation of life, humble yet profound, feeding not only bodies but entire ways of being. The story begins with maize. What began as a simple wild grass, teosinte, with kernels small and hard, became through patience and generations of careful tending the maize that would shape civilizations. Imagine the first farmers selecting seeds, season after season, noticing which plants bore fuller ears, which kernels were softer, which stalks stood tall against the wind. Slowly, silently, without haste, maize transformed. It became more than food. It became the heart of sustenance, appearing in every meal, every field, every ritual. Fields of maize stretched across valleys, their green leaves whispering in the wind like soft choruses. Beside maize grew beans. They curled upward along the stalks, climbing, intertwining, offering not only nourishment, but renewal. Their roots restored nitrogen to the soil, quietly feeding the earth as they fed the people. Their pods, filled with dark, speckled seeds, promised warmth through winter nights, boiled in pots that simmered over glowing embers. In the quiet of kitchens, beans softened slowly, their fragrance mingling with smoke, their presence steady and dependable. At their feet spread squash. Broad leaves stretched across the ground, shading soil, keeping it cool, holding back weeds. Their blossoms opened like golden stars in the morning sun, and their fruits swelled slowly, offering food that could last through months. Some squash were small and tender, eaten fresh. Others grew thick-skinned, their flesh stored for long seasons, their seeds roasted for warmth and strength. Together, maize, beans, and squash formed the three sisters, a family of plants that sustained families of people. They were not grown separately, but together, each supporting the other. Maize rose tall, giving beans something to climb. Beans enriched the soil, feeding maize and squash alike. Squash spread wide, protecting roots and conserving water. It was a lesson of harmony, of community, of quiet companionship, written not in words but in roots and leaves. Daily life revolved around them. At dawn, women stepped into fields, the dew still clinging to leaves. They bent to pull weeds, to guide vines, to gather what had ripened. Children followed with baskets, their laughter mingling with the rustle of plants. Men repaired tools, sharpened stone hoes, carried water from rivers to thirsty rows. The work was steady, patient, filled with rhythm. And when harvest came, it was not only survival that was celebrated, but gratitude, a recognition that life itself was a gift grown quietly from the soil. Meals in these villages carried the flavor of the three sisters. Steaming bowls of maize porridge in the morning, tortillas pressed by hand and cooked upon flat stones, stews where beans and squash mingled with chilies, roots, and herbs. Each bite carried both nourishment and memory, connecting families to the soil, to seasons, to ancestors who had planted the same seeds centuries before. Around fires, maize dough was patted into thin rounds, beans boiled in clay pots, squash roasted until sweet and tender. Food was not rushed. It was tended, prepared, slowly shared generously. But the three sisters were not only food, they were woven into story and ritual. Maize was often seen as sacred, a gift of the gods, a plant whose life mirrored human life, born from seed, growing tall, bearing fruit, then withering and returning to earth. Beans and squash joined it in myths, companions in tales of creation and survival. During planting, seeds were placed into soil with whispered prayers. During harvest, thanks was offered before the first bite was taken. Every seed was more than potential food. It was a thread in the fabric of existence. In the evenings, as fires glowed and stars shimmered, baskets of maize kernels rested beside hearths, waiting to be ground in the morning. The sound of grinding stones filled the night, rhythmic and steady, like a song repeated through generations. Children fell asleep to that sound, the steady scrape of stone upon stone, carrying them into dreams of fields green with stalks, golden with ears, alive with blossoms. The three sisters endured not only because they fed, but because they taught. They taught harmony, that life is stronger when companions support one another. They taught patience, that the earth yields slowly but generously. They taught gratitude, that survival is never owed but always gifted. In their quiet companionship, they shaped not only diets but entire civilizations, making possible the growth of villages, the rise of cities, the flourishing of culture. To dream of maize, beans, and squash is to dream of simplicity, of green fields whispering in the wind, of baskets filled with harvest, of fires where food simmers slowly into nourishment. It is to dream of the quiet truth that life itself rests not upon monuments, but upon seeds, planted with care, grown with patience, shared with love. There are moments in history when human hands, guided by patience and vision, lift stone upon stone until the earth itself seems reshaped. In ancient America, the pyramids rose slowly, not in the noise of conquest, but in the rhythm of countless footsteps, in the steady lifting of burdens, in the quiet labor of generations. To stand before them even now is to feel the weight of silence, the shadows of centuries pressed into stone, the presence of people whose names are forgotten, but whose work endures. Imagine the great pyramid of the sun at Teotihuacan, its vast bulk rising against the sky, each step carrying the memory of countless workers. In the morning the sun strikes its face, and shadows retreat slowly, as if the stone itself awakens. At dusk the pyramid darkens again, its angles softened into quiet silhouettes, its presence immense yet still. The city around it once thrummed, with life, markets, plazas, homes filled with families, but the pyramid was a still heart, a mountain of stone built not by nature, but by human will dot in the lands of the Maya. Pyramids lifted above jungles, their steps steep, their crowns crowned with temples. At dawn, mist curled around their bases, vines crept across their stones, parrots wheeled above in bursts of color. Priests climbed their stairs slowly, carrying offerings, their footsteps echoing in the vast quiet. These pyramids were not simply monuments, but stages for connection between sky and earth, between people and gods, between the present and eternity. Each stone was a story, carved, carried, lifted, set in place. Some weighed more than a man, yet were moved with patience, with ingenuity, with ropes and levers, with countless hands working in rhythm. The process was slow, but slowness was not failure, it was reverence. To build such structures was not to race against time, but to walk with it, step by step, year by year, until shape emerged from labor, until vision became form. Within the pyramids, chambers echoed with ceremonies. Torches flickered, casting light. Upon painted walls, upon carvings of serpents, jaguars, and ancestors. Incense smoke curled upward, sweet and heavy, mingling with chants that rose and fell in hypnotic cadence. Outside, crowds gathered in plazas, their faces lifted toward stone, listening to voices that carried across space, blending with the call of birds, with the whisper of wind. But the pyramids were not only places of ceremony, they were also markers of time, shadows cast upon their steps, aligned with solstices, equinoxes, with the turning of seasons. At certain days the sun struck their angles in such a way that serpents seemed to descend, light itself becoming participant in the eternal dance. To live near them was to live not only in the present, but in awareness of cycles, the cycles, of stars, of crops, of life itself. Yet for all their grandeur, the pyramids also carried silence. When night fell and fires dimmed, they stood alone under the stars, immense shapes pressed against the sky, surrounded by the soft breathing of jungles or deserts. Their stones absorbed the night air, their steps glowed faintly in moonlight, and they became companions to owls, to insects, to the endless turning of constellations. To lie upon their steps, to rest one's head upon their stones, was to feel both the weight of human effort and the vastness of the universe above. Life in their shadows was tender. Families lived in modest homes, children played in courtyards, women ground maize, men worked fields and crafted tools. They looked up at pyramids not as distant monuments, but as parts of their daily world, steady presences that anchored life. For them, the pyramids were not wonders, but neighbors always there, always watching, always whispering of both labor and spirit. Centuries later, jungles crept across many pyramids. Roots pried stones apart, parrots nested in their cracks. Yet, even hidden, even softened by moss and vine, their presence endured. Travelers stumbling upon them felt awe not only at their size, but at their quietness, their patience, their endurance. These pyramids had outlasted wars, droughts, and generations. They remained as they always had, silent witnesses to time. To dream of the pyramids is not to dream of power or conquest, but of shadows. Long shadows stretching across plazas at dusk, soft stone warmed by the sun, steps leading upward into silence. It is to dream of countless hands placing countless stones, of fires glowing faintly against carved walls, of stars watching patiently above. The pyramids remind us that history is not only written in words, but carved in stone, not only told through kings, but through the steady labor of people whose names are carried only by silence. Across the vastness of ancient America, rivers were the first roads, the first maps, the first lifelines. Before the carving of stone highways or the spanning of bridges, there were waters that moved silently across plains and through valleys, carrying with them the memory of mountains and the promise of seas. To the people who lived along their banks, rivers were not only sources of water, not only routes for travel, but companions gentle, presences that shaped the rhythm of life and whispered softly in the quiet hours of night. Imagine a village nestled beside a broad river at dawn. The mist rises from its surface, curling like smoke, veiling the far bank in silver haze. Canoes rest upon the shore, their wooden bodies dark with dew, their prows pointing toward open water. The first stirrings of life begin with the river, women kneeling at its edge, filling jars with cool water, their reflections rippling in the current. Children skipping stones that arc briefly before sinking with quiet splashes. Men setting out, nets that will drift slowly, waiting for the tug of unseen fish. The river is not only a boundary, but the very center of the day's beginning dot as the sun climbs higher. The river shines like a mirror reflecting sky and tree alike. Its currents move patiently, neither rushing nor halting, carrying seeds, branches, and silent stories downstream. Traders glide upon it in canoes, their goods stacked carefully, maize, pottery, woven mats, feathers bright as flame. They paddled steadily, their arms moving with practiced rhythm, their eyes scanning for familiar landmarks along the banks. For them, the river is a guide as well as a path, leading them toward distant villages where quiet exchanges of life will take place. The river feeds the fields. Its floods deposit rich soil upon the banks, turning the land into gardens where maize, beans, and squash flourish. Irrigation channels are carved from its side, narrow streams that glitter in the sunlight, carrying life into terraces and plots. Farmers bend over these waters with gratitude, pressing seeds into damp earth, watching shoots rise day by day. Without the river, the soil would harden, the fields would wither. With it, life thrives in steady abundance. But rivers do more than nourish the body, they nourish the spirit. Along their edges, rituals unfold. Offerings of flowers are placed upon small rafts and set adrift, drifting slowly away until the current carries them out of sight. Children laugh and chase the floating gifts, while elders murmur prayers to the unseen presences of water. The river is a messenger, carrying words and wishes toward horizons unknown. Its surface, smooth and shimmering, becomes a mirror of both, earth and heaven reflecting the stars by night as faithfully as it reflects the clouds by day. In the afternoons, families gather upon its banks. Women wash clothes, the fabric snapping gently against the current. Men mend nets, their fingers steady as they tie knots. Children splash in the shallows, their laughter mingling with the murmur of water. Dogs chase after sticks tossed into the stream, their barking softened by the air. The river holds all these sounds, lending them into a single harmony, a music of life that requires no instrument. At times, the river is calm, its surface broken only by ripples of fish. At times, it rages with floods, its waters rising, carrying branches, stones, even whole trees in its grasp. People watch with reverence, retreating to higher ground, knowing that the river is both giver and taker. Its strength is respected, its patience admired, its unpredictability accepted. To live beside a river is to live with awareness that nothing is entirely within human hands, that survival is always shared with forces beyond control. Nights by the river are tender. Fires glow along its banks, their light flickering upon water that gleams like liquid bronze. The air is filled with the chorus of insects, with the occasional splash of fish leaping into the dark. Canoes drift slowly, their paddlers guided by the faint glimmer of moonlight upon the current. Families sleep in homes nearby, their dreams carried softly by the murmur of water that never ceases. The river speaks even in silence, its voice low and endless, like a lullaby whispered through reeds. Some rivers grew into centers of entire civilizations. Along the Nile in distant lands empires rose, and in the Americas the Mississippi, the Amazon, and countless others carried the seeds of life, the flow of trade, the gathering of people into communities. Along their edges, villages became towns, towns became cities, and cities became empires. Yet always beneath all grandeur, the river remained the quiet heart, patient and eternal, whispering the same steady song. To dream of rivers in ancient America is to dream of stillness and movement at once, of water reflecting stars, of canoes gliding silently through mist, of fields nourished by floods, of voices carried by currents. It is to remember that civilization itself does not stand apart from water, but flows with it, shaped by it, sustained by it. Rivers were not only roads or lifelines. They were companions, steady and timeless, carrying the quiet footsteps of forgotten civilizations upon their endless currents. If rivers were the lifelines of ancient America, then forests were its quiet cathedrals. They spread like oceans of green, vast and unbroken, sheltering countless forms of life. Under their canopies, small settlements nestled, as if under protective hands, their homes and fires hidden among trunks and leaves. To live in the forest was to live with shade, with silence that was never empty, with the constant chorus of birds and insects, with the patient whisper of leaves stirred by wind. Imagine walking into such a settlement. The first thing one notices is not walls or roads, but trees towering cebas, spreading palms, graceful mahoganies. Their roots twist across the ground like great sleeping serpents. Their branches weave overhead to form roofs of living green. Beneath this canopy, homes stand modest, walls of wattle and daub, roofs of palm fronds, doors open to breezes, carrying the scent of damp earth. Smoke rises in thin streams, disappearing into the leaves above, the fires themselves small and steady. At the heart of each dwelling, life in these settlements moved with the rhythm of the forest. At dawn the world awakened, not with silence, but with the songs of countless birds. Scarlet macaws screeched from the treetops, toucans called with hollow notes, hummingbirds darted among blossoms. The air shimmered with movement, alive yet gentle. Families stirred in their homes, children emerging sleepily into the cool morning, women stepping out with baskets, men reaching for tools of stone and wood. Daily work was shaped by the forest's abundance. Fruits were gathered, papayas heavy with sweetness, avocados soft and green, guavas glowing with fragrance. Nuts were cracked, roots dug, medicinal plants collected with care. Men hunted carefully, moving silently along paths worn by deer and tapir, their boughs ready, their eyes watchful. Women wove mats from reeds, baskets from palm fibers, nets from vines. Children followed, learning with each step which plants nourished and which healed, which paths led safely and which must be avoided. But the forest was not only provider, it was protector. Its thick canopy shielded villages from harsh sun. Its trees offered timber for building. Its plants gave medicine for sickness. At times, storms passed overhead, their winds thrashing leaves into furious motion, their rain falling in torrents. Yet beneath the trees, life was sheltered, softened, steadied. To live in the forest was to feel enclosed by something greater than oneself, to be held within a vast, living body. Evenings in these settlements were filled with warmth. Fires burned low, casting circles of light upon the trunks around them. Families gathered, eating meals of roasted roots, stews of maize and beans, fruits sliced and shared. Laughter mingled with the forest's night song, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of monkeys, the soft call of night birds. Elders told stories of spirits who lived in trees, of ancestors who once spoke with animals, of stars that guided hunters through shadows. The homes themselves reflected harmony with the forest. Their walls were not permanent, but renewed when needed. Their roofs shed rain, their floors pressed flat by footsteps. Within, mats were spread for sleeping, jars of water placed carefully, baskets of maize, and fruit stacked neatly. Everything was close at hand, everything simple, everything suffused with the scent of leaves, smoke, and earth. Children fell asleep to lullabies sung softly by mothers, voices blending with the endless murmur of forest life. Their dreams were shaped by sounds outside, the rush of wind through leaves, the flutter of bats overhead, the patter of rain upon fronds. To them the forest was not mysterious or frightening, but familiar, a constant companion whose presence wrapped around their lives as gently as a woven blanket. And in the quietest hours of night, when the fires burned low and the village lay still, the forest continued its endless song. Cicadas pulsed with steady rhythm, owls glided silently, streams whispered over stones, and the leaves rustled as if the trees themselves were breathing. The people slept within that breath, as much a part of the forest as the roots and branches. Around them, the settlements may not have left behind vast temples or cities, but they left impressions upon the land, traces of harmony between human life and nature. Their legacy is not measured in stone, but in the gentle balance they found, in the quiet way they lived beneath the canopy, asking for little, receiving enough, and giving respect in return. To dream of forest settlements is to dream of dappled light falling upon clay walls, of children's laughter rising through leaves, of fires glowing softly against trunks. It is to remember that civilization need not always conquer nature. It can dwell within it, humbly, patiently, listening to the endless whisper of trees. Fire has always been more than flame. In the ancient world it was warmth in the cold, light in the dark, a companion against silence. For the peoples of ancient America, fire was not only survival, but spirit. It became a bridge between the living and the unseen, a beacon where prayer, memory, and community gathered together in circles of light. Ceremonial fires were not rushed or careless. They were slow, steady, deliberate, glowing softly in the heart of night. Imagine a gathering at dusk, A village quiets as the sun sinks behind mountains or forest. Families drift toward a central space, each carrying small bundles of wood, herbs, or offerings. In the center, a fire is kindled. Sparks leap upward, catching the first breath of night. The flames grow, crackling softly, their light dancing across faces turned toward them. The air carries the faint sweetness of burning copal resin, its smoke rising in graceful curls as if carrying prayers skyward. The fire is more than warmth. It is presence. Around it, people sit in circles, their voices lowered, their attention drawn to the flicker of flame. Elders speak, their words unhurried, each syllable stretching into silence. They tell of ancestors who walked the same lands, of spirits who dwell in rivers and trees, of stars that watch from above. Children lean closer, their eyes wide in reflection of the fire's glow, the words etching themselves quietly into memory. Ceremonial fires often marked turning points. The planting of maize, the harvest, the solstices, the passage of seasons. At planting, seeds were placed near the flame before being pressed into soil, their journey blessed by light. At harvest, maize and beans were offered back to the fire, a gesture of gratitude for what had been received. At solstices, when nights lengthened or shortened, flames were tended carefully, as if carrying the heartbeat of the sun itself into human hands. Music accompanied the glow. Drums beat slowly, like the steady pulse of the earth. Flutes sang high, their voices weaving through smoke. Rattles shook gently, imitating rain or the whisper of leaves. Together the sounds merged with the crackle of wood, forming a single harmony of earth, fire, and people. Dancers sometimes moved around the circle, their shadows stretching and shrinking with the flames, their steps repeating ancient patterns that told stories without words. But not all rituals were grand. Some fires were small, tended quietly within. Homes. Families placed offerings of food into the flames or whispered prayers into smoke that carried them upward. In times of sickness, herbs were cast into fire, their fragrance believed to cleanse and heal. In times of grief, tears fell into embers, mingling with ashes, reminding the living that fire consumes but also transforms. The fire also served as a gathering of silence. There were times when no one spoke, when all simply watched the flames shift and dance. In that silence, thoughts softened, worries fell away, and presence deepened. The fire was a teacher, reminding people that stillness was as sacred as speech. That light itself carried meaning without words. The ceremonies were often linked to the stars. As the fire blazed below, constellations wheeled above. The people believed the two lights, one earthly, one heavenly, spoke to each other. The Milky Way mirrored the fire's sparks, carrying their glow into eternity. To sit between fire and sky was to sit at the center of worlds, to feel suspended between the visible and the invisible. When dawn finally came, the fire's embers glowed faintly, reduced to soft red coals. People departed slowly, carrying with them the warmth of night. Some took a small coal home to relight their hearth, ensuring that the sacred flame spread through the village like threads of connection. The circle remained, blackened earth where wood had burned, a quiet reminder that even when the fire faded, its presence endured. The memory of these ceremonial fires lingers. Though their smoke has vanished, their warmth has cooled, their glow has dimmed, the feeling of gathering in their light remains. They remind us that rituals are not only about grandeur, but about presence, that the simple act of sitting together by flame can be as sacred as any temple dot. To dream of ceremonial fires is to dream of faces glowing in soft light, of smoke drifting into star-strewn skies, of voices rising and falling with the crackle of wood. It is to remember that history is not only written in stone, but also carried in flame, in warmth, in the gentle light of ritual. Before stone highways stretched across empires, before bridges spanned rivers and caravans wound their way across deserts, there were paths simple, narrow, sometimes little more than trails pressed into soil by countless footsteps. These were the first roads of ancient America, not laid with mortar, but with memory, not paved with stone, but worn smooth by the passing of hunters, traders, and pilgrims. They were quiet roads, carrying no clatter of wheels, no thunder of horseshoes, only the soft rhythm of human feet and the gentle tread of llamas and dogs. Imagine such a path winding through the forest. The canopy above filters sunlight into shifting patterns of green, while the air hums with insects and the distant call of birds. The path itself is narrow, barely wide enough for two to walk side by side, but its presence is unmistakable. Each turn bears the memory of generations, each bend polished by sandals made from plant fiber, each clearing shaped by those who paused to rest, to drink from streams, to wait for companions. Walking upon such a road was not merely travel, it was stepping into the footprints of countless ancestors. Some paths ran along rivers, their curves echoing the water's flow. Others cut across plains, stretching endlessly beneath vast skies, where grasses bent with the wind and the horizon seemed to recede forever. Still others climbed mountains, zigzagging carefully up slopes, clinging to cliffs where even a misstep could mean falling into silence. To follow these roads was to learn patience, endurance, and trust in those who walked before. The Inca, centuries later, would build the Grand Capac-on, a network of stone-paved roads across the Andes. But even before such engineering, there were smaller trails woven by traders who carried maize from valleys to highlands, by hunters who tracked deer across ranges, by pilgrims who sought sacred springs or mountain shrines. These trails were as important as rivers, tying villages together, connecting lives, carrying not only goods but stories, songs, and memories. Along the paths, way stations took simple forms: a shaded tree where travelers rested, a cave where fire once glowed, a spring where jars were filled with water. Over time, these stopping points became familiar landmarks in a world without maps. A certain boulder shaped like a jaguar, a grove where parrots nested, a crossing where stones allowed safe passage, all became part of the road's memory, as much guides as the stars above. Travelers upon these roads carried silence with them. Their voices were low, their steps steady. A trader guiding llamas laden with woven cloth and dried fish would murmur softly to his animals, his words blending with the sound of their padded feet upon stone. A family moving toward a distant festival would walk together, children skipping. Ahead, elders steady in their pace, their presence stretching the road into living procession. To walk was to participate in an old ritual, one repeated generation after generation. The roads were also teachers. They taught endurance, for journeys were long. They taught humility, for the land was vast and unforgiving. They taught patience, for every step was necessary, every mile earned. and they taught connection, for no road was ever walked alone. Even in solitude, the traveler felt the presence of all who had come before, all who would follow their footsteps. Mingling invisibly upon the same earth dot at night, the roads carried a different silence. Travelers camped beside them, their fires flickering faintly against the darkness. Stars arched overhead, the Milky Way itself often described as a celestial path mirroring those below. People looked upward and saw not random lights but trails across the heavens, reminding them that all journeys, on earth or in sky, were connected. The road underfoot and the road overhead were part of the same great weaving. When dawn returned, the travelers rose, gathered their belongings, and continued. The road stretched on, indifferent to their pace, carrying them forward. It was not owned by anyone, not claimed by rulers or states in those early times. It belonged to all who needed it. It was a communal thread, invisible yet binding, soft yet strong. Though empires would later pave and expand these paths into highways, their essence remained unchanged. They were still walked step by step, mile by mile, with patience, endurance, and quiet faith. Even when stones were laid, the memory of soft soil beneath feet lingered. The road was never about speed. It was about connection, about presence, about moving gently across the land. To dream of these ancient roads was to dream of shadows moving beneath trees, of llamas stepping carefully along cliffs, of families pausing at riversides, of stars guiding the night. It is to remember that history is not only carved in monuments, but pressed into soil, in the countless footsteps that shaped paths so quiet yet so enduring. Before words were written in books, before histories were carved upon stone, the people of ancient America spoke through clay. In their hands, earth itself became vessel-shaped, smoothed, painted, fired into permanence. Pottery was not only utility, though it carried water and stored maize. It was also memory, patience, and quiet artistry. Every bowl, every jar, every figure held within it the rhythm of hands pressing into soft clay, the whisper of breath across stillness, the hush of fire transforming earth into form. Imagine a village at dawn. In one corner, a woman kneels beside a mound of clay, damp and heavy from the riverbank. She presses it between her palms, rolling it slowly, shaping it patiently. Her children watch, their small fingers eager to mimic, to shape their own small figures. The air carries the scent of smoke from nearby hearths, mingling with the earthy fragrance of wet clay. Each gesture is unhurried, for clay does not hurry. It waits, it yields, it invites the maker into its quiet pace. Pottery began with necessity. A vessel to carry water from the river, a jar to store beans through the winter, a bowl to hold porridge, a plate for roasted squash. But necessity blossomed into art. Soon vessels bore designs, spirals, animals, stars, symbols of rain and sun. Some patterns were etched before firing, others painted afterward in red, black, or white. To lift such a vessel was to hold more than utility. It was to hold story, belief, and memory pressed into clay. The process itself was ceremony. Clay was gathered with respect, often with prayers whispered as earth was taken. It was kneaded, its stones and roots removed, until it grew smooth beneath hands. Coils were rolled and stacked, walls rising slowly, spiraling upward like growth. Itself, fingers smoothed the edges, palms pressed curves into shape. Time stretched, unhurried, until the vessel stood complete in form, though not yet in strength. Then fire was prepared. Firing was transformation. Pots were placed carefully into pits covered with wood and dung, flames rising slowly around them. The air filled with smoke, sparks drifting into sky. Hours passed, sometimes days, as the fire worked patiently, hardening clay, sealing memory into permanence. When the flames died and the ash cooled, the vessels emerged, changed, fragile earth reborn into durable form, ready to serve, to endure, to carry life within them. In some cultures, pottery bore faces, animals, even gods. Jars shaped like owls, bowls painted with serpents, figures of ancestors cradled in hands. These were not mere objects but presences. To drink from a cup shaped with care was to share space with the spirit it carried. To store seeds in a jar painted with maize was to ask for blessing in the next harvest. Pottery became a bridge between the seen and unseen, between the daily and the sacred. The sound of pottery filled villages quietly. The scraping of tools against clay, the rhythmic rolling of coils, the gentle tapping of fingers shaping form. Children learned by imitation, their first creations clumsy, yet cherished. Elders perfected their craft, each pot smoother, stronger, more balanced. Knowledge passed not in words but in gestures, the way a hand pressed, the way a thumb smoothed, the way a pot was lifted from fire with reverence. At meals, pottery was the silent companion. Families gathered around bowls, dipping hands into stews, sipping water cooled in clay jars. At ceremonies, painted vessels carried offerings filled with maize beer or cocoa, placed upon altars beside fire. At burials, jars were set beside the departed, filled with food and drink for journeys beyond life. Pottery held not only nourishment but hope, not only sustenance but continuity, and yet for all its artistry, pottery remained humble. It cracked, it broke, it was remade. Shards scattered in soil became the record of lives long gone. Today, when such fragments are unearthed, they speak not with grandeur, but with tenderness. A piece of rim with painted spirals tells of the hand that painted it. A broken handle tells of the vessel once lifted daily from fire. They are small whispers, but together they form the echo of entire worlds. At night, in ancient villages, vessels glowed faintly in firelight, their curves reflecting orange and red, their shadows stretching long across clay walls. Families slept, with jars of water beside them, bowls of grain stored near, the presence of pottery surrounding them like guardians. And in the silence of night, the vessels held their form steady, patient, enduring just as they had been shaped to do. To dream of pottery is to dream of soft clay yielding beneath palms, of fire transforming earth into vessel, of painted spirals circling quietly around curves. It is to dream of bowls filled with maize, of jars resting in shadow, of fragments whispering across centuries. Pottery was and remains the quiet voice of civilization, speaking not in words but in shapes of clay, steady and eternal. Long before words were sewn into books, the people of ancient America wove their stories into cloth. Threads twisted from plant fibers, spun from cotton, or drawn from the soft wool of llamas and alpacas, became more than garments. They became memory, protection, offering, and art. To weave was not merely to make clothing, it was to bind the past to the present, to join the patient rhythm of hands with the endless rhythm of time. Imagine a small courtyard in a highland village. The morning sun stretches over terraced fields, and within the quiet of stone walls, a woman sits before her loom. Her fingers move steadily, drawing colored threads over and under, tightening, releasing, shaping patterns that carry meaning far beyond their beauty. Children play nearby, pausing now and then to watch, their eyes following the dance of thread. As if it were magic, around them the air is filled with the soft rasp of yarn against wood, the faint hum of a song sung under her breath, the gentle clink of tools set aside. The materials themselves were gifts of the land. Cotton grew in warm valleys, its white fibers gathered carefully, seeds removed, fluff spun into smooth strands. In the Andes, llamas and alpacas were sheared, their wool washed, carded, spun into strong, warm threads. Each fiber carried the scent of the earth, the touch of rain, the warmth of animals or soil. To spin them was to honor their origins, to continue their journey into form and purpose. Colors came from nature's quiet palette. Cochineal insects crushed into brilliant red, indigo plants steeped into deep blue, clay and minerals ground into earthy yellows and browns. Each dye was prepared with patience, boiled in pots over slow fires, fibers dipped and stirred, lifted, and dried in the sun. The colors were never merely decoration. They carried meanings: red for life, black for night, yellow for maize, blue for sky. To wear such cloth was to carry the earth itself upon one's body. Patterns, too, spoke softly of memory. Diamonds and zigzags, spirals and steps, figures of animals, shapes of mountains and rivers, all woven into fabric that told stories without words. A poncho might carry the image of a condor's wings, reminding the wearer of freedom and sky. A sash might bear zigzag lines, echoing lightning and storms. A blanket might hold spirals of water, a prayer for rain to nourish fields. Each design was more than beauty. It was history carried forward, visible to those who knew how to read it. Weaving was often the work of women, though men too joined. In certain regions it was labor, yes, but also meditation. The steady repetition of motions, thread passing over, thread passing under, was like breathing. Hours slipped by in stillness as patterns emerged, slowly, patiently. To watch a weaver was to witness time itself being woven, past memories drawn into present hands. Present gestures extending into the future. Cloth was essential to life. It wrapped infants against cold, clothed families in daily labor, marked the bodies of dancers during festivals, covered the deceased as they journeyed into the next world. Blankets warmed homes, ponchos shielded against rain, sashes held tools and belongings. Yet each piece carried more than function. It carried love, memory, and quiet dignity. A mother wove not only for warmth, but to leave her child with something. Of her hands, her patience, her care. In marketplaces, cloth became currency as much as food or tools. Traders carried rolls of woven fabric alongside baskets of maize and clay vessels, exchanging them for salt, fish, or feathers. To hold such cloth was to hold not only the material, but the hours, the patience, the artistry of another's life. Every thread carried the silent labor of hands, the slow generosity of time. Ritual, too, was woven into weaving. Special garments were made for ceremonies, tunics bright with color, cloaks shimmering with feathers woven into their threads, belts embroidered with sacred designs. These were worn when planting, when harvesting, when calling upon the spirits of mountains and rivers. Cloth became prayer, binding the human body to the world of gods and ancestors. At night, looms rested in corners, the half-finished threads waiting quietly for morning. Families gathered around fires, wrapped in blankets that had once been threads, now transformed into warmth. Children fell asleep upon woven mats, their dreams carried in the patterns beneath them. The loom stood silent, but it held the memory of every hand that had touched it, every story told through thread. Today, fragments of ancient cloth remain faded, fragile, yet enduring. Their colors still glimmer faintly, their patterns still whisper of mountains, rivers, and sky. They are reminders that weaving was not only craft but history, not only labor but legacy. Each fragment is a voice, soft but steady, carrying across centuries the rhythm of hands, the patience of hearts, the gentle weaving of memory. To dream of weaving is to dream of threads crossing patiently, of colors drawn from earth and sky, of patterns unfolding like stories told without words. It is to remember that civilization is not only built of stone but of cloth, woven quietly in courtyards, carried gently upon shoulders, passed from generation to generation like whispers. In thread. Across ancient America, where jungles crept thick and rivers wound endlessly, where deserts glowed red at dusk and mountains lifted into the clouds, people built temples. They were not only places of grandeur or power, though they often stood, tall and commanding. They were places of stillness, where human hands shaped stone into sacred form, where silence itself became a companion of prayer, where the unseen world was invited to dwell among the seen. The temples breathed with stone slowly, steadily long after the voices that built them had faded. Imagine a clearing at dawn in the Maya lowlands. Mist curls around the tops of trees, drifting softly across plazas paved with stone. Out of the jungle, the shape of a pyramid temple rises, its steps steep, its summit crowned with a small sanctuary. The air is damp, filled with the scent of wet earth and flowers. Birds stir in the canopy, their cries echoing faintly. At the base of the temple, a priest lights a torch, the flame flickering weakly at first before growing brighter, sending curls of smoke upward along the stone. In that moment, the temple awakens, its silence filled with presence. The temples were more than buildings. They were mountains carved by human will, places where earth reached toward sky. Their steps lifted people from the ground into the realm of the divine. Their walls, decorated with carvings of serpents, jaguars, or celestial beings, told stories that needed no words. To climb their stairs was not only to ascend physically, but to rise spiritually, each step a meditation, each breath a prayer. Inside, chambers held shadows. Torches cast wavering light upon painted walls, scenes of gods emerging from flowers, of rulers clothed in feathers, of stars embodied as beings. Incense drifted through the air, its sweetness mingling with the heavy stillness of stone. The sound of drums might echo, low and steady, their reverberations filling the chamber like the heartbeat of the temple itself. To stand there was to feel enclosed by presence, wrapped not only by walls but by something greater, something timeless. The Aztecs, the Maya, the Zapotec, and countless others each shaped temples in their own way, but all carried the same truth. That stone could breathe. Built block by block, their weight was immense, but their silence was gentle. They did not shout. They waited, they endured. Even when vines crept over them, even when roots split their stones, even when roofs collapsed, the temples remained present. Their breath slowed, but it did not cease. Rituals filled these spaces softly. Offerings of flowers, feathers, maize, cacao, or jade were laid upon altars. Priests whispered chants, their words rising like smoke into unseen air. Communities gathered in plazas, their faces turned toward the temple's steps, their bodies swaying gently with the rhythm of drums. Sometimes dances unfolded, the soft shuffle of feet upon stone, repeating patterns as old as memory. Sometimes silence itself was the ritual, the people simply watching the flame, the smoke, the stone, and feeling connection. The temples were aligned with the cosmos. Their doorways faced the sun at solstice. Their corners matched the turning of stars. When the sun rose or set at certain times of year, its light pierced chambers, illuminated carvings, revealed secrets hidden in shadow. The people saw not coincidence but harmony, proof that their temples were not merely structures but instruments of time, tuned to the universe itself. Even outside of ceremonies, temples shaped life. Children grew up playing in their shadows, chasing one another across plazas where their laughter echoed against stone. Families rested at their bases, sharing food, weaving cloth, repairing tools. Travelers approached them after long journeys, recognizing them as landmarks, their forms rising above forests or deserts, guiding footsteps like beacons. They were part of daily life as much as sacred life, always present, always enduring. At night, temples carried a different presence. The moon bathed their stones in silver, stars scattered above them like jewels upon black cloth. The jungle quieted, the desert cooled, and the mountains held their breath. In that stillness the temples seemed alive, their stones absorbing moonlight, their steps glowing faintly, their silence deepened into something eternal. To sleep nearby was to rest within their gaze, to feel their presence steady and watchful, like guardians who asked nothing, but gave everything. Centuries have passed, yet many temples remain. Some stand tall, their stones sharp and clear, their steps still climbable. Others lie broken, their blocks scattered, their carvings softened by rain. Yet whether whole or ruined, their breath continues. They are not merely relics. They are companions of time, witnesses to countless dawns, countless dusks, countless nights of stars. To dream of these temples is to dream of steps rising into mist, of torches glowing faintly against stone, of incense curling upward into the sky. It is to remember that civilizations breathe not only through people but through places, through stones shaped with patience, through silence filled with presence. The temples of ancient America remind us that stone can carry breath, that silence can speak, that memory can endure longer than voice. Civilizations are remembered for their temples, their roads, their monuments, but beneath all these, what binds people together is the rhythm of gathering. In ancient America, festivals marked the turning of seasons, the planting of seeds, the harvesting of crops, the honoring of gods, the remembrance of ancestors. They were moments when villages and cities, usually filled with the steady hum of daily labor, transformed into places of music, dance, and color. Yet even within their liveliness there was stillness, an underlying quiet joy, the deep contentment of being together. Imagine a wide plaza beneath the rising sun. The stone beneath bare feet is cool, the air alive with expectation. Families emerge from homes carrying baskets of maize, beans, squash, and fruit. Traders arrive from distant villages, their llamas or canoes laden with cloth, pottery, feathers, and salt. Musicians gather, flutes and drums in hand, tuning their instruments with soft notes that drift like bird song into the morning. Children run ahead, their laughter echoing against walls of stone. Slowly, steadily, the plaza fills with life. At the heart of the festival, offerings are made. Fires are lit, smoke rising in graceful spirals toward the sky. Priests carry bowls of cacao, handfuls of flowers, and woven cloth, laying them gently upon altars. Words are spoken not loudly but with reverence, their echoes softened by the stone walls surrounding the square. The community bows their heads, silence settling briefly before voices rise again in chant. This is not noise for its own sake. It is rhythm, memory, connection, the sound of belonging. Then the dancing begins. Feet move softly at first, tracing patterns worn into the ground by generations before. The dancers wear garments bright with feathers and cloth dyed in the colors of sun and rain. Their steps are deliberate, each one echoing a story, the planting of maize, the flight of birds, the turning of stars. The drumbeat grows steadier, guiding the bodies in circles, weaving individuals into community. Children mimic the steps clumsily. At the edge, elders clap in time, and the festival breathes as one. Food fills the air with fragrance. Tamales wrapped in leaves steam from clay pots. Maize tortillas sizzle upon stones, their scent mingling with roasted squash and beans. Cacao is stirred into frothy drinks, passed from hand to hand, warming both body and spirit. Families sit in circles, eating together, sharing bites with neighbors, offering to travelers who have come from afar. To eat during the festival is more than nourishment, it is communion, a reaffirmation that life is sweetest when shared. Music drifts continuously, weaving itself through the day. Flutes call like birds, their high voices mingling with the low pulse of drums. Rattles shake in steady rhythm, imitating the sound of rain. Singers chant verses remembered from ancestors, their melodies simple, repeating, drawing listeners into a kind of trance. Even in moments of laughter and liveliness, the music holds a deep calm, reminding all that joy itself can be quiet, steady, enduring. As the sun lowers, shadows stretch across the plaza. Children tire, curling against their mothers' sides. Traders begin to pack their goods, their baskets lighter but their hearts heavy with the joy of connection. Fires are rekindled, their glow softening the edges of the night. The last dances unfold, slower now, the drumbeat fading, like the heartbeat of the day itself. Families linger, reluctant to part, their voices hushed but warm. Night deepens, and the festival closes not with abruptness, but with stillness. Embers glow, stars scatter across the sky, and the plaza returns to quiet. Yet the silence is different now, fuller, richer. It carries the laughter of children, the rhythm of drums, the taste of shared food, the memory of countless footsteps moving together. The community disperses, but the spirit of the gathering lingers like warmth long after the fire has cooled, dot festivals were never only about ritual or celebration, they were about connection. They reminded people that life, with all its labor and hardship, was meant to be shared, that joy was not separate from survival, but intertwined with it. To gather was to strengthen the invisible threads binding one life to another, one family to another, one generation to the next. To dream of festivals in ancient America is to dream of plazas glowing with firelight, of dancers moving slowly beneath, feathers and stars, of flutes calling gently into dusk. It is to remember that history is not only written in stone and soil, but also in joy and laughter, in the quiet contentment of being together. Among the jungles, deserts, and mountains of ancient America, where wind whispered through trees and rivers murmured endlessly, stone was given voice. Carved patiently, shaped slowly, it became more than rock. It became presence. Statues and carving stood as silent guardians, bearing faces of gods, animals, and ancestors. They did not speak in words, yet they carried weight and memory, their stillness echoing across centuries. Imagine walking into a clearing deep within the forest. The air is heavy with the scent of damp leaves, and shafts of sunlight fall like golden spears through the canopy. There, rising from moss and roots, stands a figure of stone. Its eyes are wide, its mouth stern, its body adorned with carved spirals and lines. Birds rest upon its shoulders, vines coil at its base, yet its presence remains unshaken. It does not move, yet it watches. It does not breathe, yet it endures. Such statues were never only decoration, they were guardians, companions, silent presences in the life of a community. The Olmec were among the first to give stone such form. Their colossal heads, carved from basalt, rise taller than a person, each face distinct, each expression unique. Set in plazas or near rivers, they gaze outward with heavy lids, their lips full, their helmets carved with care. No one knows precisely whom they depict, rulers, ancestors, gods, but their presence is undeniable. To stand before one is to feel the gaze of time itself, slow and steady, unyielding. Elsewhere, the Maya carved steely tall stone slabs covered with images and glyphs. They bore the likeness of kings, the stories of battles, the turning of calendars. Yet beyond their records they were presences. Standing in rows, they cast long shadows across plazas, their surfaces worn smooth by rain, yet still holding the echoes of chisels that once struck with patience. Villagers passing them daily saw not only stone, but memory made visible. Guardians of time itself died in the highlands. Statues of deities and animals were placed in temples or at crossroads. A jaguar crouched in stone, its muscles frozen yet alive with power. A serpent coiled in curves, its scales etched into rock. A human figure stood with arms crossed, its face solemn, its body stylized into sacred geometry. Each was more than image, they were companions of ritual, embodiments of powers that moved unseen through the world. Carving was labor that demanded silence. A stone was chosen carefully, lifted with great effort, transported often from far away. The carver worked slowly, hour after hour, chip after chip. Each mark carried intention, each groove patience. The sound of hammer upon chisel echoed across valleys, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. To carve was to join stone and spirit, to shape not only form but meaning. At night, the statues remained, their outlines soft by moonlight. Torches flickered nearby, casting shifting shadows that made faces seem to move, eyes to follow, mouths to whisper. Children looked upon them with awe, perhaps fear, but always with respect. Elders told stories of the spirits that dwelled within, of the guardians who never slept, who watched over fields, rivers, and villages with eternal vigilance. Even when abandoned, the guardians endured. Forests grew around them. Roots pressed against their sides, moss covered their carvings, yet they did not vanish. Travelers stumbled upon them centuries later and felt their presence as keenly as those who had once bowed before them. Their silence was their power, their stillness was their voice. They carried the breath of civilizations long gone, whispering through form what words had lost. Today, when fragments of these carvings are unearthed, they speak softly still. A broken face, an eroded glyph, a fragment of a serpent, each is a reminder that stone remembers. Unlike flesh or wood, it does not vanish quickly. It endures, carrying the weight of hands that shape it, the breath of people who prayed before it, the silence of centuries that followed. To dream of statues and carvings is to dream of faces emerging from stone, of guardians standing in plazas, of eyes gazing forever outward. It is to dream of jungles reclaiming temples, of vines wrapping around figures that nonetheless endure. It is to remember that civilizations do not disappear entirely. They remain in the silent guardians of stone, patient, steady, eternal. When the fires burned low, when the day's labor ended, when villages grew hushed, and even the rivers seemed to soften their murmur, the people of ancient America looked upward. Above them stretched the vast sky, a canopy of stars more brilliant than many of us can imagine today. With no lights to dim them, each star shone like a sharp crystal. Each constellation glowed with presence, and the Milky Way spilled across the heavens like a luminous river. Night was not an end, but a transformation, a time of wonder, of reflection, of dreams. Imagine lying upon a woven mat outside a small clay home. The air is cool, scented with the faint smoke of dying embers. Crickets pulse in steady chorus, and an owl calls faintly from the edge of the forest. Above, the sky opens an ocean of stars, stretching without boundary, their light falling softly upon the earth. A child stares upward, pointing with small fingers, asking what those lights are. An elder answers, not with science, but with story. The stars are ancestors watching. They are animals roaming the heavens. They are gods carrying torches through the night. The sky is a book, and its stories are endless. For the Maya, the Milky Way was a celestial river, a reflection of the waters that flowed upon the earth. For the Inca, it was a great celestial llama, its shape traced in dark patches between the stars, its presence tied to the cycles of life and herding. For many peoples, constellations were not abstract patterns, but living beings, companions who watched over the night. To look at the sky was to look into memory, to see reflected above the same life carried below. The stars guided as well as inspired. Travelers upon rivers and roads looked upward to find their direction. Farmers looked to the horizon at dawn to know when rains would come, when fields should be planted, when harvest must begin. The sky was a calendar, patient and eternal, more reliable than any stone carving or human word. Each rising of a star, each phase of the moon, each eclipse became a mark of time, a reminder that life flowed in cycles, not in lines. Ceremonies, too, unfolded beneath the stars. Fires were lit in plazas, dancers moved in circles, flutes and drums played softly, all under the gaze of constellations. The people believed the heavens watched, that the gods and ancestors listened from above. Smoke drifted upward as offerings, prayers carried into sky, merging with starlight. To celebrate under the stars was to feel both small and infinite, a single breath within eternity, yet also part of something vast and enduring. Night was also the time of dreams. After the music faded and the fires dimmed, families lay together within their homes, wrapped in blankets, the cool air brushing gently against their faces. Sleep carried them into worlds shaped by memory and spirit. Dreams were not dismissed, but honored. They were messages, signs, whispers from ancestors or gods. In the quiet of night, a hunter might dream of animals guiding him, a farmer of rains approaching, a mother of children yet to be born. The boundary between waking and dreaming blurred, both woven into the rhythm of life. The moon, too, played. Its role, rising above jungles or deserts, it bathed the world in silver light. Its phases marked time, its glow guided night journeys, its absence deepened the stars' brilliance. People sang to the moon, told stories of its travels, watched it fade and return with patient reverence. It was never taken for granted, but always seen as companion, as presence, as rhythm. Sometimes the night brought fear. Shadows stretched long, strange sounds echoed in forests. Storms lit the sky with lightning. Yet even then the people found comfort in the stars. They were steady, unshaken by storms, eternal above shifting clouds. To gaze at them was to feel reassurance, a reminder that though life was fragile, the heavens endured, constant and eternal dot. And when dawn finally approached, the stars faded slowly, one by one, retreating into the brightness of sun. Yet they did not vanish. They lingered in memory, in story, in dream. The night might end, but its calm, its vastness, its quiet lessons remained to dream of the nights of ancient. America is to dream of lying beneath a sky so full of stars it seems to sing. It is to dream of elders telling stories by fading embers, of children falling asleep with eyes fixed upon constellations, of travelers guided by moonlight across plains and rivers. It is to remember that civilization is not only built upon earth, but also beneath sky, that the calm of night is as much a foundation as the labor of day. If the rivers carried water and the fields carried food, then the elders carried memory. In the ancient Americas, before words were written in books, history lived in voices. Storytellers were the libraries of their people, their words preserving not only events, but beliefs, lessons, and dreams. Around fires at night or beneath trees at midday, they spoke slowly, deliberately, weaving past into present, reminding listeners that to belong to a people was to belong to their stories. Imagine a circle of families gathered in the soft glow of a fire. Sparks rise upward, drifting into the night sky where stars gleam like distant embers. Children lean against their mothers, their eyes wide, their bodies drowsy, with their minds awake. Elders sit upright, their voices steady, their gestures calm. They begin not with haste, but with silence, letting the fire crackle, letting anticipation grow. And then the words flow, not rushed, not shouted, but slow, like water moving through reeds, like wind across grass. The stories are not merely tales. They are guides. One may tell of the coyote, clever and foolish, teaching children the dangers of pride and the value of wit. Another may tell of a great flood, reminding families of the power of water and the need for respect. Others tell of stars that were once people, of animals that gave gift to humankind, of ancestors who walked these same paths long ago. Each story carries truth, though not always in the form of fact. Its truth lies in meaning, in the quiet lessons woven through. Every word, elders did more than recount, they remembered. They carried genealogies, reciting the names of ancestors stretching back through time. They knew when planting should begin, guided by the memory of seasons long past. They remembered which paths led to water, which plants healed sickness, which omens and dreams foretold change. Their wisdom was not written, but spoken, held in breath, passed from one heart to another. Children learned by listening. They sat close, memorizing not only the words but the rhythm, the pauses, the gestures of the storyteller. In time, one child would grow into the next voice, carrying the stories forward, ensuring they would never be lost. This passing of memory was sacred. To listen was an honor. To tell was a responsibility. Through it, the people became more than individuals. They became threads in a fabric woven across generations. Stories also carried comfort. On long nights when storms raged outside, when winds howled through forests or deserts, when fears pressed close, elders told tales that steadied hearts. They reminded listeners that the world was vast but not hostile, that spirits watched and ancestors cared, that survival was not lonely but shared. Their words wrapped around families like blankets, warming them as surely as fire itself. Even in festivals, storytellers played their role. In plazas, before gathered crowds, they spoke of heroes and gods, their voices rising above music and dance. Their words gave context to rituals, explaining why fires were lit, why seeds were planted, why dances circled endlessly. Without the storyteller, the ritual might lose its roots. With them, every act became part of a larger story, one stretching back into the dawn of time. But perhaps the most profound moments were the quiet ones. An elder speaking to a single child as they walked along a path. A grandmother murmuring stories while weaving cloth. A grandfather whispering myths as he sharpened a tool. These were not performances, but gifts, small offerings of wisdom folded gently into daily life. At night, when sleep came, the stories lingered. Children dreamed of coyotes and serpents, of stars that moved across the sky with purpose, of ancestors who smiled from beyond the fire's glow. Dreams and stories blended, forming a tapestry of meaning that shapes lives quietly but profoundly. Today, even fragments of these stories endure, written down later by others or preserved in the memories of descendants. They still carry the voices of those who first spoke them. They remind us that history is not only stone and artifact, it is also word, breath and silence. To dream of storytellers is to dream of firelight upon lined faces, of voices steady and calm, of children listening with wide eyes. It is to dream of the quiet wisdom that binds generations, of words carried gently across centuries, of memory spoken into being. The elders of ancient America remind us that civilization is not only built of roads and temples, but of stories told slowly with love in the glow of quiet fires. Civilizations rise upon many foundations, yet none is steadier than the soil beneath the hand of the farmer. In ancient America, where jungles pressed thick and mountains stood tall, where deserts stretched wide and rivers wound endlessly, farming was not merely labor, but rhythm, patience, and devotion. It was the unseen work that fed the people, the quiet tending of fields that allowed cities, temples, and festivals to exist at all. Without the farmers, there could be no civilization. Imagine dawn breaking over a valley. Mist clings to the ground, the air cool and damp, the sky painted in soft hues of gray and gold. A farmer steps into the field, carrying a wooden hoe worn smooth from use. The soil is dark, rich with promise. Birds stir in the hedges, their wings flashing briefly in the early light. The farmer kneels, pressing seeds of maize into the earth. Each seed is small, almost fragile, yet within it lies the strength to feed a family, a village, a people. He covers it with soil, pats it gently, whispers a prayer. Then he moves to the next and the next. Farming is not haste, it is repetition. Steady and calm, a dialogue between human hands and earth. Maize, beans, squash, the three sisters were the heart of many fields. They grew together, each helping the other. The maize rose tall, its stalks strong and straight. The beans curled upward, climbing the maize, adding strength and giving nitrogen to the soil. The squash spread wide, its leaves shading the ground, keeping it moist, protecting it from weeds. Together they formed a family, a harmony of growth that fed countless generations. Farmers did not see them as separate crops, but as companions, living symbols of cooperation and patience. In the highlands, terraces cut into mountainsides held potatoes and quinoa, their green rows cascading down slopes like steps into the sky. Farmers carried water up channels, guided it carefully along stone paths, ensuring each terrace drank just enough. In deserts where rain was rare, canals and ditches carried river water into dry fields, turning sand into green. Farming was invention as much as labor, patience, not only with soil but with stone and water. The work was daily, unending yet never rushed. Farmers rose with the sun, tended fields through heat, and returned home at dusk with baskets of maize, beans, or roots. Children helped, their small hands dropping seeds into rows, their laughter mixing with the rustle of plants. Elders advised, reminding when to plant, when to harvest, when to let fields rest. Life moved with the turning of seasons, the rhythm of rains, the patience of growth. And yet farming was more than survival. It was sacred. To place a seed into the ground was to trust the earth, to enter into a covenant of care. Farmers offered prayers before planting, sprinkled maize flour upon the soil, or left small offerings at the edge of fields. They sang as they worked, their songs simple and repetitive, blending with the wind, with the rustle of leaves, with the buzzing of insects. Each act was not only labor but ritual, a quiet honoring of the partnership between human and earth. Harvest brought gratitude. Fields turned golden with maize, heavy with beans, full with squash. Families gathered, cutting stalks, lifting roots, filling baskets. Laughter and songs filled the air. The harvest was not rushed, but careful, deliberate, each basket carried. With reverence, some of the first fruits were offered back to the earth or to the gods, a reminder that abundance was a gift, not a guarantee. The rest was stored in granaries, dried in the sun, ground into flour, or roasted in clay ovens. These stores would carry villages through winters and lean seasons. Each kernel of maize a tiny treasure of patience fulfilled. At night, after long days in the fields, farmers rested upon woven mats. Their muscles ached, but their hearts were steady. They knew their labor had fed children, strengthened families, sustained communities. The quiet of night was filled not with regret, but with contentment, the peace that comes from work done. Slowly, patiently, with love, even today, when we see ruins of temples or fragments of pottery, we must remember that beneath them lay fields, tended by countless hands we do not know. Farmers who woke early, bent low, pressed seeds into soil, and waited. Their patience, their quiet labor, their endless dialogue with earth made possible everything else. To dream of ancient farmers is to dream of green rows stretching across valleys, of terraces climbing mountainsides, of canals glistening in sunlight. It is to dream of seeds placed gently in soil, of songs drifting softly over fields, of patience enduring longer than any monument. Farming was not only survival, it was civilization, grown quietly, season by season, with hands that trusted. The earth. Before stone was carved, before words were inscribed, people in the ancient Americas looked to the animals around them for guidance, companionship, and meaning. The creatures of forest, desert, mountain, and sea were not seen as lesser beings, but as kin. They were teachers, messengers, protectors, and sometimes even gods themselves. In their fur, feathers, and scales, people saw reflections of life's mystery, reminders that humanity was not separate from the world, but woven into it. Imagine dawn in the highlands. A farmer leads llamas along a narrow mountain trail. There, soft hums echo gently, their padded feet pressing quietly into the earth. These animals are not only burdens for carrying goods, but companions, patient, steady, enduring. Families speak to them as though they understand, thanking them for their strength, stroking their wool as they walk. In return, the llamas provide transport, warmth from their coats, and in their quiet gazes, a reminder of gentleness. In the forests, jaguars moved like shadows, their golden coats dappled with black. To many peoples, the jaguar was sacred, an embodiment of strength, mystery, and the spirit world. Shamans wore jaguar pelts during rituals, believing that in dreams and trance they could walk as jaguars, crossing boundaries between worlds. Yet, the jaguar was not only feared, it was respected, honored, seen as a brother who shared the land, powerful yet necessary in the balance of life. Birds filled the skies with wings of color. Parrots with feathers of red, green, and blue became treasures. Their plumage used to adorn headdresses and garments of ritual. Eagles soared high, their strength admired, their flight a symbol of vision. Hummingbirds darted swiftly from flower to flower, their delicate movements inspiring tales of love and persistence. Each bird was not only admired for beauty, but remembered in stories, carrying meaning as deep as their songs. The serpent, too, coiled through myth and memory. In rivers, in forests, in carvings upon temples, it appeared again and again. Serpents symbolized renewal, shedding old skin for new. They were guides of water, guardians of fertility, and bridges between earth and sky. In some places, feathered serpents stretched across stone walls, their forms combining bird and snake, a reminder that life was not limited to one shape, one boundary, one form. Dogs walked closely with humans. They were guardians of homes, hunters, companions, keepers of warmth in cold nights. But more than that, they were believed to guide souls after death, leading the departed across rivers into the next world. To hold a dog's loyalty was to hold comfort, not only in life but in the silence that followed. Their soft eyes and steady presence made them beloved, woven deeply into the rhythm of family and community. Even the smallest creatures were honored. Insects humming across fields were seen as workers in their own right, bees bringing sweetness, ants teaching persistence. Frogs croaking near rivers heralded rain. Fish swimming in streams brought nourishment, their scales glinting like fragments of stars. Nothing was dismissed as trivial. Each creature had its role, its voice, its spirit. The bond was not only practical, but spiritual. Animals were included in rituals, represented in carvings, remembered in stories. Children were taught to respect them, to see not only their use, but their presence. A bird was not just feathers for a headdress, it was a voice of the sky. A jaguar was not only a predator, it was a guardian of balance. A llama was not simply a carrier of loads, it was a partner on the path at night. When fires flickered and voices softened, elders told stories of animals who once spoke to humans, who gave gifts, who shared wisdom. Children fell asleep, dreaming of flying like eagles, running like jaguars, swimming like fish. In dreams, the bond deepened, carrying across generations, ensuring animals were remembered not as background, but as kin. Even now, fragments of this reverence remain, in woven textiles patterned with birds, and pottery shaped like jaguars, in carvings of serpents and dogs. We see glimpses of a world where humans and animals were never separate. Their bond was not one of domination, but of companionship, of respect, of shared existence. To dream of the animals of ancient America is to dream of feathers glowing in sunlight, of jaguars watching from the shadows, of llamas humming softly on mountain trails, of dogs curled near fires guiding souls in silence. It is to remember that life is always shared, that civilization itself was not built alone, but alongside the creatures of earth, sky, and water. In the villages, towns, and great cities of ancient America, women moved quietly, yet powerfully, through the rhythm of daily life. Their hands shaped clay, wove cloth, prepared meals, tended gardens, carried children, and kept memory alive through song and story. Their work was often unseen, their names unrecorded in stone, yet their presence was essential, the gentle current beneath the visible surface of civilization. Without them, the flow of life would falter, for they were the keepers of continuity. The strength carried not in shouts, but in whispers that imagine the soft light of morning inside a small home of clay and reed. A woman kneels beside the hearth, kindling fire from glowing embers left overnight. Smoke drifts upward, filling the air with the faint scent of maize flour and ash. Children stir under blankets, rubbing their eyes, while she grinds maize upon a stone, her movements steady, rhythmic, patient. The grinding stone hums with her labor, turning kernels into meal that will soon become tortillas, tamales, or porridge. Her work nourishes not only bodies, but the spirit of family itself. In the fields, women tended crops alongside men. They pressed seeds into soil, pulled weeds, gathered fruits, and sang softly to keep rhythm. Their voices blended with the rustle of leaves, with the buzzing of insects, with the breath of wind across valleys. Their care was not hurried but consistent, each action a thread woven into the larger tapestry of survival. Their knowledge of plants was deep, which healed, which fed, which soothed, which harmed. They were gardeners not only of fields but of health and healing. Weaving was another gift of women. Sitting with looms balanced upon their laps, they worked with dyed threads of cotton, wool, or agave fiber. Their fingers moved with patience, creating patterns of geometry and color, carried meaning as much as beauty. Each textile was more than cloth, it was memory, a visible story of lineage, of gods, of animals, and landscapes. The designs were not chosen lightly, but carried messages recognized by those who wore or saw them. When women wove, they gave form to memory, preserving culture and patterns that endured even after voices fell silent. Women were also singers, storytellers, and keepers of ritual. Around fires at night, they sang lullabies to children, songs that carried not only comfort, but the whispers of ancestors. They told myths of creation, of animals, of the stars. They guided children into the world of story, ensuring that memory was not only kept but cherished. Their words shaped the earliest dreams of their people, embedding lessons deep within hearts that would carry them forward, in rituals. Women offered food, wove garlands of flowers, prepared sacred fires. They were attendants of temples and companions of priests, voices in prayer, dancers in ceremony. Their presence brought balance, for in their steps and songs they carried the harmony of daily life into the sacred sphere. Mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sisters, they formed circles of care within the community. A grandmother teaching her granddaughter how to weave. A mother showing her son which herbs to gather. Sisters grinding maize together, laughing softly at dawn. These small, ordinary acts were civilization itself continuity. Care, quiet strength passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart. Though history often speaks of kings, warriors, and builders, the quiet work of women was no less vital. Their labor ensured meals upon the table, warmth upon the body, healing in times of sickness, and memory in times of change. They were the keepers of rhythm, the steady heartbeat beneath the grandeur of temples, and the bustle of markets at night. When the day's work was done, women rested upon woven mats, children beside them, the sound of crickets filling the air. They closed their eyes knowing their work had carried life forward once more. Theirs was not a legacy of stone monuments or carved names, but of continuity, the strength of civilization sustained in quiet hands, in patient hearts, in whispers of song. To dream of women in ancient America is to dream of firelight glowing upon faces lined with care, of threads weaving into patterns of meaning, of children lulled to sleep by gentle voices. It is to remember that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is steady, patient, and soft, like the hum of grinding stone, like the rhythm of weaving thread, like the lullaby that drifts into night.